Is this whole hybrid breeding program, as we see, in Genesis 6, and then of course Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be at the return of the Son of Man. Do you see this as some side issue, or is this a real challenge in terms of counseling, as well as a real viable satanic assault upon this last generation?
I think that the most direct answer to your question is it's probably right at the pinnacle of the pyramid, if it may be an unfortunate analogy, but it is very much perhaps the crescendo of the things that I have been reading about and researching and writing about here for the last several years.
My name is Dr. Preston Bailey. I have a Doctor of Ministry degree, but also have a PhD in counseling. I also studied dissociation at Harvard Medical School under Dr. Richard Kluft, who actually invented the term Dissociative Identity Disorder, and also under Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who is one of the top experts on the brain in the world.
When it comes to the whole counseling process and working with trauma survivors that are highly divided, conflicted, it seemed the most difficult and the most challenging for these people to get in touch with is to see their involvement on a spiritual and supernatural level of the Genesis 6 project has been called. Where do you see this in terms of a survivor's whole history? I mean, is it just like a side note, or is it something that is very highly guarded, not only in terms of DID defenses, but in terms of the enemy's plan and agenda in these last days? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would see that as the most highly guarded in those that I've worked with, and the denial being the highest level around what needs to be covered and uncovered. What I have found, I should say, over the years, is that very few people are able to go to that place and really stay there and work with it and continue till they heal.
My research tends to be focused on the influences of Nazis, fascists, and basically war criminals that escaped the Nuremberg trials and were essentially immigrated and brought into the United States by American officials. From the State Department, the Department of Justice played a very big role, and so I have done a considerable amount of research in the various ways that the U.S. government has been active in facilitating this movement of really what I consider to be the doctrines of the Antichrist into the United States.
I trained as a psychologist, was licensed as a psychologist, and put in a few years being licensed, and then came to realize that I could be more effective for the Lord if I was not licensed.
So I've been doing this since about 1983, and I believe that the Nephilim breeding program is extremely important, especially in light of the last days in which we're living in.
Whether we talk about NASA, we talk about the space program, whether we talk about certain kinds of social engineering, America has played an amazing part in what I believe is the agenda of the Antichrist in these last days.
And I've been working with survivors actively since 1992. I realize now that I saw many survivors before then in a ministry that I was working with, but I didn't know what to do for them. And really that's what caused me to go back to school.
I've counseled people with DID in Germany. I've been all over Canada counseling people. I've counseled people from Australia and throughout the United States.
So I went to South Africa and ministered and saw many, many who were survivors, but of course not able to really get into the type of counseling that they needed. But even there, I suspected that there was, for the people I saw, things that were much deeper and needed the Nephilim understanding to be able to get to freedom.
The many reports that we have and testimonies, not only here but with other people, is that the report of women being sexually assaulted and involved, exactly what we have in Genesis 6, producing a hybrid offspring, not in a laboratory, not in recombinant DNA process, but the actual result of copulation between fallen angels, as it's there in the text in Genesis 6, women reporting this today. Does that fit within any of your research in terms of how we could get to this point?
Well, I think that there are really two threads that come together in the phenomenon that you see and that you are dealing with virtually daily. Certainly in terms of the work with SRA, DID, the use of the intentional splitting of personalities, dissociative identity disorder. This is very much part of the work that has been done by the CIA. It's really since the 1950s. Dr. Colin Ross certainly talks about that extensively in his books, but many other authors have seen the same thing. If you talk in terms of, which I'm not really into discussions that much about alien abductions and so forth, but there's no question that's another phenomenon as well. The notion of hybrids, of the idea of aliens or fallen angels, in effect copulating with women, human women, creating a nephilim or a hybrid. That is a theme that you see in many reports, both within the Christian circle as well as outside. And so the fact that these two things could come together, it's actually not surprising. It may be startling, it may be astounding, but from the standpoint of the facts and the things that have been reported by not just a dozen, but hundreds and hundreds of persons, it certainly does fit in. And so I find it completely possible. That does tie into the research that I've done.
Because this is one of the keys of Lucifer's plan to get an army in order to fight against the Lord Jesus Christ at a key battle in the last day.
And my understanding of the work that you and other counselors have done fits in again right at the pinnacle of what is going on in the world today, and so I see it as essential to in effect the portrait of the Antichrist that I'm seeing portrayed now in our world.
They use trauma to hide the breeding program behind it. And in fact, they attack the right hemisphere of the brain because the right hemisphere of the brain has emotions, the left hemisphere of the brain has facts, and of course the corpus callosum, which is 200 million nerve fibers connecting the right and left hemisphere of the brain. They use that to their advantage to hide things in the deep recesses of the brain, and they have programming that covers it so it cannot be easily hidden. Most even DID counselors would not really come across it because it is so well hidden. It is hidden behind severe trauma. I used to be chairman of the Governor's Task Force on Child Abuse, and even child molesters and pedophiles try to hide their crimes, and they even in their limited intelligence, they know that you have to create severe trauma to hide the memories of the abuse of which they have done. So it's very important for Christian counselors to look for a core system that is hidden. Now, every programmer that is sophisticated always has a back door. So you have to find the back door to get to the shortcut. But I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that the hybrid breeding program is what a lot of the years, if not centuries, of ritual abuse and trauma is using to get to this age in these last days, so that they can create this hybrid breeder to reenact Genesis 6 verses 1 through 4, so that they can produce a Nephilim army to attack the King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the last days. The reason being is the Bible teaches there's 9 orders of heavenly beings, from seraphim all the way down to angels, and Satan, his army is outnumbered by God's army 2 to 1. So he has to use modern advanced technology, and he has to use other means to create other forms of life, even robotic forms and artificial life, to create an evil army, because he thinks he's going to defeat the omniscient, omnipresent God of heaven.
Well, it's a great blessing, privilege to be with the saints here at Morning Star, some of them. We have, of course, a long history with the folks that came with us from Tulsa to Syracuse, and we've had some new ones that have come to be with us. And so we're looking forward to introducing them to you in this documentary interview. I would say right at the outset, as I was praying this morning and meditating, the verses in Joel came to mind: put the trumpet to your mouth and warn my people. If anything comes across in this particular interview with our friends in South Africa and whoever else will be viewing this, it's extremely late. You have no idea how close we are to the Lord's coming unless you understand the significance of the birth of the nation Israel and where that fits into the prophetic timeline of where we are in history. With your backgrounds, which we will introduce you after we give some biblical framework, your backgrounds are a witness to what the end time agenda is all about. You are the witnesses. And so people want to know, where's the evidence? You are the evidence. Let everything be established on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. And we have not only used witnesses, but others that I've worked with throughout the last 25 years who have borne testimony that corroborates yours. I think of Debbie in Phoenix. I think of Julianne in Las Vegas. I think of Barbara in New Jersey. And so there are others that I have been in touch with. So this is a representation of the fact that we are living in the last days. And I wouldn't say the last days, we're living at the end of the end. So in order to just continue on with our introduction yesterday with my dear wife Lori, I want to give just a brief biblical outline and overview of what we're going to be considering together as we hear these testimonies and focusing on what the end game is. And so I want to begin with Matthew 24, where our Lord actually gave the prophecy there. And I won't go into all the details, but just pick out that one statement that he made with reference to his second coming. It's important that Matthew 24 is, of course, speaking about the second advent and not the rapture. We've covered this on the Bite Show. But in Matthew 24, 36, says, but of that day, that is the coming of the Son of Man, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. For the coming, the parousia of the Son of Man will be, notice the words, just like the days of Noah. Not similar, just like the days of Noah. For in those days, which were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, and they were marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. You say, that sounds normal. But the marriage, if you go back to Genesis 6:2, notice who is getting married. B'nai Elohim with the daughters of Adam. And we'll look at that in a moment as a part of our introduction to our consideration here today. There's a similar passage in Luke chapter 17, verse 26. Notice the wording, and just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it shall be. Just as, so it shall be in the days of the Son of Man. And so this is a very explicit statement that takes a segment of history, zooms in on it, and then that gives us the context of what we can expect the end of this age will look like. And so as you who have come out of the projects, been a part of the Genesis 6 project, been a part of the royal bloodline agenda in concert with Satan to bring in their last king, whom we know to be Antichrist, this all has more meaning as we look at this. So again, verse 26, and just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it shall be also in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. And so those marriages and all that represented, they had to be destroyed. I think another verse, I'll just read from Genesis 6, the passage that has been so abused by so-called scholars, and I won't spend a lot of time with this, but just merely cite it, because those that will be speaking to and speaking with and sharing with in South Africa, they've already been oriented on this, and there'll be others that will watch this in the future who are not confused about the line of Seth theory, which didn't even come into vogue until the time of Augustine. So all the Jewish rabbis, Josephus, and the early fathers understood Genesis 6 to mean exactly what it says, that the passage here is referring to angels. Genesis 6, and it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, which is a unique phrase found in Job 1:6, 2:1, and 37 verse 7, or 38 verse 7 rather. These B'nai Elohim refer specifically to angels, as we see in those passages. By the way, Job is older than Genesis in terms of its historical referencing Job. So the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that is Adam. They were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, the days of Noah, and also afterward when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men. That's a euphemism for sexual intercourse, by the way. And they bore children to them. So the fallen angels and the Nephilim are not the same. There are those out there that are confusing this. They say the fallen angels, the Nephilim rather, are the fallen angels. They're not. They're different. The children are not the same as their father. Okay? So that should be quite obvious. So they, the daughters of men, of Adam, bore children to them. That is the B'nai Elohim, the fallen angels. Those were mighty men, the champions, the heroes who were of old, men of renown, men of name, men of reputation. And that is a study in and of itself. Now, if we go to the New Testament commentary on this, in Jude 6, I'll spend a little bit of time here because there are two commentaries on this in the New Testament of this momentous event in history. And we pick this up in Jude 6. And angels, notice, the angels, the sons of God in Genesis 6 are here referred to as angels, and angels who did not keep, that is, guard their own domain. This arche is their original state, their first estate, their appointed sphere, their first domain. their own office, their own position of authority. These are different translations of this word arche. They did not guard it. In other words, these angels had a specific assignment by God with reference to creation, and they, of course, in their rebellion against God, they did not guard it. And then we see that they deserted their proper abode. This word abode here is only found in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 2, which refers to the future resurrection bodies of the saints. And those resurrection bodies, according to 1 Corinthians 15, are pneumatikos, they're spiritual bodies. And so they abandoned their spiritual bodies, if you will, in order to assume physicality. And by assuming physicality, then they were able to carry out the satanic agenda against the promise found in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where the seed of the woman was prophesied to come and crush the seed of the serpent. So the attack is upon the seed of the woman, which is a prophecy referring to Christ. And so this is the adversary's first attack upon that seed to thwart there being a pure humanity that could come and redeem us. And so we see that they abandoned their proper abode, their oikonomai, their habitation. Again, as we see the word used on only one other place in 2 Corinthians 5:2. God has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Well, this is obviously not Satan. We know from 1 Peter chapter 5, he goes about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So he's not in chains. The demons and principalities that Paul refers to in Ephesians 6 that we are in mortal combat with, they're not in chains. So who are these? This group of angels can only be those angels referred to in Genesis 6. There's no other biblical option. And so that removes this passage from referring to the fall of Satan. This passage does not refer to the fall of Satan. And then notice we have a comparison to what happened in the days of Noah to what took place at Sodom and Gomorrah regarding a specific sin. And I'll comment on that in a moment on an email that I sent out to those on my email list. And just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they in the same way as these, by the way, that pronoun these refers back grammatically to the angels of verse 6. So the cities around them, in the same way as these, that is, these angels, indulged in gross immorality. That is a strong term, not pornuo, but ekpornuo. And they went after strange flesh, that is, that which is contrary to their nature and that which God intended. So as those in Sodom and Gomorrah went after that which was contrary to divine order, we read about them in Romans 1, the angels went after women. It was not a part of God's assigned order for them as created beings. And they are exhibited as an example in undergoing punishment of eternal fire. There's another commentary on this passage found in 2 Peter. I'll just read it. In the particular reference here in 2 Peter, of course, the context is the days of Noah. And 2 Peter chapter 2, again, the context, the days of Noah. I will not spend all the time on the passage that it deserves, but it's talking about the judgment on apostate teachers. 2 Peter 2 and verse 4, if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but notice, cast them into hell, Tartarus, which is below Hades. It is the abode of the rebellious titans that we find in Greek mythology. They're in prison. Well, let me ask you this. Is Satan and demons in prison? The demons that were manifesting when Jesus walked this earth, were they in prison? So who are in prison? It's a specific group of angels. So the line of Seth theory is really just a theory. It's eisegesis, it is not exegesis. So these particular angels that sinned in Genesis 6, notice what it says, they were cast in, literally it's a term is they were tartarized, they were placed into Tartarus and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness. See the context? It's clear. It's how anyone could relate the sons of God in Genesis 6 to angels is quite baffling, but I believe it's about spiritual warfare. It's about Satan trying to obfuscate and cover up his real end-time agenda. Now, there's one other prophecy that I want us to look at in preparation here as we interview these saints that have been a part of the projects and part of the generational agenda in these last days. And that prophecy is found in Daniel chapter 2. We're all familiar with the prophecy of the image that's presented there. We see in Daniel 2 the image that represents the kingdoms in Daniel's day, from Babylon all the way through to Rome and the revived Roman Empire. And we see in the last part of this vision, which Daniel is interpreting for Nebuchadnezzar, verse 40, there will be a fourth kingdom. This is Daniel 2 and verse 40. As strong as iron, inasmuch as it crushes and shatters all things. Like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush, it will break all these in pieces, all the kingdoms. And in that you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom. And that is, of course, that in the Aramaic and the Hebrew, this always means an unnatural and violent division, causing discord and disharmony. It will be a divided kingdom. It will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron, partly of pottery, and some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay. They will combine with one another. Notice these words. They're very specific, and they are pointing to mixed marriages. It's pointing back to the same phenomenon that we see in Genesis 6, only this is now future in the last days. They will not combine with one another in the seed of men, so the they and the seed of men are separate, but they, in contrast to the seed of men, will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. Now I want to just comment on this, and this will be our lead-in to interviewing all of you who we have with us today. And this is my commentary on this particular verse, which I sent out on an email here several months ago. In my view and understanding of Scripture, what needs to come into more precise biblical focus and recognition are the testimonies of those Christian women who are witnesses to the fact that there has been a hybrid breeding program and resultant birthing of modern-day Nephilim offspring reportedly in progress since at least 1962. Now, the actual inception or event is tied in with the birth of Israel, but I'm talking about the first generation offspring. The reports that we have, there was a birth given in 1962. The project began earlier. So also at the heart of these last days, at the heart of this last days hybrid agenda is defined by Jesus' prophecy, as we noted, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the return of the Son of Man. At the center of this biblically defined phenomenon is the fact that angels in this generation are sinning in the same way. They're sinning in the exact same way they did before the flood, 2 Peter 2:4. The Holy Spirit in Jude 6 and 7 defines with precision what this specific sin involved by using a term that only occurs one time in the Greek New Testament, ek pornuo, translated as gross immorality in the New American Standard Bible. Thayer's Greek-English lexicon of the New Testament states, the prefix ek in front of pornuo seems to indicate a lust that gluts itself, satisfies itself completely, unquote. This word is the intensified form of the Greek term pornuo, which means to engage in any form of sexual immorality, such as is found in 1 Corinthians 6:18, 10:8, Revelation 2:14 and 20, etc. Jude 6 and 7 reveals that those angels' specific sin mentioned in Genesis 6, 1 through 4 is compared to the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is described as going after strange flesh. The Greek term there, an adjective I believe, is heteros. It means flesh that is contrary to God's design for both mankind and angels. Matthew 22:30 says the angels of heaven neither marry or given in marriage. Those are the elect angels. So these angels were acting contrary to the angels of heaven that is mentioned by Jesus in Matthew 22:30. So this is exactly what the women with whom I and other Christian counselors have been working with have been reporting since the mid-'80s. That's a long time. And here it is, 2012. And we're just now talking about it publicly in this venue. These women are not alien abductees, but Christian women who are survivors of generational satanic ritual abuse, who were handed over to these dark powers by their biological fathers and or forefathers. Excuse me. Whatever is currently occurring in secret laboratories and facilities around the world involving scientists producing modern-day hybrids, chimeras, etc., is a significant adjunct or supplement to the primary and only means known to fallen angels of producing a first-generation hybrid, and that is ek porneo, gross fornication. I say that because there are those out there saying that through recombinant DNA process that mankind in a laboratory can recreate this. Not so. This is sacrosanct to the adversary. He's not going to let this technology go. All the technology is being reported by Tom Horn and others that have written books, including Doug Hamp. They talk about the projects that are peripheral to this central core. This is central. And what I'm saying is that what has happened to you ladies and others that I know is exactly what we have in Genesis 6, whereas all that which is being talked about in terms of the forbidden gates and the work of Tom Horn, which has been wonderful, is some of it is peripheral, and it is a part of that which is reported in the pseudepigraphal books like Enoch and Jasher. But the central focus of what we have in the Word of God is exactly what you women have reported in others. So this gross fornication, this is what the Bible states, which corroborates what the witnesses of this phenomenon have consistently reported, which is at the heart of Jesus' prophecy in the passages we've already cited in Matthew 24:37 and Luke 17:26 and 27. Now in the passage we read in Daniel 2:43, it is highly significant that the Holy Spirit uses the Aramaic word arav 3 times, and is translated as mixed, and then twice as combined in that one verse. Mixed and combined, that is the New American Standard Bible. And in the footnote, number 67 in the Net Bible, quote, says, the reference to people being mixed is usually understood to refer, now get this, to intermarriage, unquote. Intermarriage. So there we have it. If you want to follow this up further, you can go to Wikipedia and type in royal intermarriage. You see the mindset and the agenda of the kings of the earth as they are mentioned in Psalm 2 and, of course, throughout the book of Revelation. These kings of the earth are, of course, governed by these same powers and agenda to destroy the human race and thwart the coming of Jesus Christ. So this word we're talking about here, arav, is in the Aramaic, but the cognate term is used in the Hebrew and Ezra 9:2, and notice how it's translated in Ezra 9:2, which was God was forbidding the children of Israel to mix with the wives of foreign nations. It's translated in intermingled, same word, and which describes illicit marriages with the holy seed or Old Testament people of God. This term was used as a pledge or a guarantee between two parties, this particular word that we're referring to in Daniel 2:43. In this passage, that is Daniel 2:43, the prophetic implication is that the fallen watchers or fallen sons of God in our generation have once again obtained women by collaborating with the contemporary kings of the earth. And there are a number of passages that you can see where this term is used, such as Psalm 2:2, and then throughout Revelation you see these kings of the earth and their prophetic framework. Revelation 6:15, 16, 12 and 14, 17:2, 12 and 18, 3 and 9, all the way through. 19:19 is a very important passage about these kings of the earth as they align themselves in battle under Satan as the armies of Antichrist to stop the coming of Jesus Christ. So these kings of the earth in our generation, they have sired daughters to be given as a pledge in exchange for technologies, which are now being employed by scientists around the world involved in transhumanism and human enhancement technologies. And we can thank Tom Horn for the work he's done on Forbidden Gates, Nephilim Stargates 2012, some of this research that we see in Doug Hamp, although I do not agree with how he sees Antichrist coming to being, because it's a theory, but he's done some excellent research and articles on this. So the other key term used in Daniel 2:43 in the Aramaic is davak, translated to adhere. That is, the clay will not adhere to the iron. The term is first used in the Hebrew Old Testament in Genesis 2:24 to describe the one flesh union between man and woman in marriage, translated to cleave. So even in this term, we see the environment, the context of marriages that will take place between these mysterious day in Daniel 2:43, which I believe is a clear indication that the last days that we're living in are as they were in the days of Noah. So we see this term is used to describe marriages, and of course the language and significance of this passage in Daniel for these last days is clear. We have arrived. We are at the end of this age, and this is what I trust will come across, and those who will be viewing this are friends in South Africa that will be visiting, but those who will be viewing this at a future time to understand that when it comes to evidence, you're going to be hearing witnesses. If you were to study the Holocaust, you wouldn't go to the historian first and foremost as a primary source. The primary source would be interviewing the survivors of the Holocaust, you see. And so that's what this is about. But the context of all this is that the Lord has allowed this. What is His purpose? And why good and loving God would allow His own children to go through such a spiritual holocaust of shame and devastation. And I think it's important for people to be thinking about that, because God has a plan that is going to completely trump the adversary. His response to what has happened to you will be vindicated in the very near future when, as we've studied on the Bite Show, the days of visitation, the final revelation of Jesus Christ, his final statement is going to be made. And when the Black Awakening, as Brother Russ Dizdar has reported, when that event occurs, God's going to have His morning star. He's going to have a manifestation of the glory of Jesus Christ as seen on the Mount of Transfiguration, displayed in saints who have gone through this. I believe that those who have this history, you will probably be most likely one of the top candidates of God's choice to display the triumphant character and features of Jesus Christ as the morning star. So we look forward to this time. We know this is not easy, but we feel like this is an investment in this generation to give witnesses as well as God an opportunity to have a voice to that which is so hidden in the church and so denied or avoided for whatever reason. We want to blow the cover off. We want people to be aware, those who have ears to hear, to be aware. So this will be the conclusion of our introduction before we begin our interview with the saints here at Morning Star. This is something rather new to me. With some of the younger people I'm working with, in the past, it was Mengele or Dr. Bowlby or PJ, or some of these people were involved in at the trauma-based mind control in terms of programming. But the recent reports I have with the younger generation, what they are reporting is that the existing hybrids are present doing specific kinds of trauma, and actually they're now standing in the place of the programmers. Now this has been new to me, but it's been a collaborative, or I should say cooperative, that there are hybrids that are now doing the programming, and it makes the internal structuring, of course it's supernaturally involved, but the structuring is very, very complex. But I have to say that these people are being resolved much quicker because of what the Lord has taught us. But it looks like to me all the stops are pulled out, and the hybrids are real, and they're involved in doing the trauma and programming. That's the report I have. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments.
Yes, I concur 100%. Here's an interesting case I had just 3 weeks ago. This was just 3 weeks ago. I never met the woman. In fact, I have so far just talked to her on the telephone. I had her and her husband on the telephone, and an associate that helps me. I was able to, in the first session, I was able to get past the trauma, and I never mentioned nephilim. I never mentioned anything related to that at all. I never mentioned hybrids. I never mentioned breeding. Never mentioned any of that. I just asked her open-ended questions. No one can say that I put any memories or thoughts into her mind. I just asked her open-ended questions. I would say, for example, what do you see? And one of her alters came up, and she said, I am in a deep underground military base. This is in California. It turned out her grandfather worked for a private aerospace contractor for the U.S. military. He would take her on a regular basis to this deep underground military base, and she would describe in detail a table, a surgical table she would be placed on. She described military scientists who would program her. She described strobe lights. She said very clearly, I hate strobe lights because that's what they would use to traumatize me. But we also found an altar that said these hybrid creatures were in the deep underground military base one day in a laboratory where they programmed her. I never mentioned anything remotely like this. She described perfectly these hybrid nephilim that would program her. What is interesting is this. She said these hybrids, they worked with the U.S. military and giving them advanced technology. And she said that there are times when the U.S. military would work on a project that these hybrids did not want them to work on, and with some technology they cut off all of their electricity. And I thought that was so interesting. She said they had advanced technology, and what's also interesting, she said they have living machines that they would use. Now, the average person, the average even DID counselor would not think of that in their wildest imagination. And she described this perfectly. These living machines would also be used to program her by these Nephilim hybrids.
See, Preston, what you're describing is exactly what we're in touch with here. I sent you that David Adair video where he described that in 1971, this engine, which was capable of propelling an anti-gravity craft of 200 feet in diameter, he realized that this engine was a symbiotic engine that which would be flown by a symbiotic connection with what he called aliens. The reports that we have now is that once, like in Genesis 6, when these angels They did not guard their original arche, their assigned sphere of rule, but they abandoned their oikoinome. We know from not Genesis, but 2 Corinthians 5:2, that oikoinome is a reference to the future resurrection body of believers. So they left their spiritual bodies, and we know they assume some form of physicality, and evidently they can't return once they do it. So they would need to have technology and what is called UFOs to be able to transport themselves to carry out their nefarious activity. And here's the report. I believe these hybrids are in symbiotic union with Satan, so that they represent in the flesh Satan multiplied. These craft, which are actually they're actually built, they're physical, but they're also symbiotically an extension of the hybrid, so that when you go in these craft, it's like going into a Nazi Bell, the Glock, and the whole environment is so spiritually charged with trauma that these people, this is what they describe, is that they get reprogrammed, they're taken all over the world in high-speed flight to carry out massive rituals in North Korea and this kind of thing. I didn't know what to do with this when I first heard it, but I listened to Dr. Paul LaViolette, and he said, yes, we have craft, and then the Black Ops have produced that can go anywhere in the world within 15 minutes. And when he said that as a physicist, I thought, well, that's interesting. So I went on Amazon, and under books I typed in man-made UFOs, and I was shocked at the number of books that are written on man-made UFOs. But here's the whole point, is that I believe that these symbiotic craft, they are an extension of the hybrid, so that they respond, perhaps telepathically. I don't know how they do it, but these entities need them now because they abandoned their oikoinome, And it's just like Genesis 6, only now they're adapting their deception in these last days to think, well, this is all an alien phenomenon, and they're going to come back and lead us into the new age and all that kind of stuff. But it seems to me where we are in history right now, Preston, is that we are at the very end of the end, and the next major event is disclosure, and everything's in place. These crafts, some of them I believe are fallen angels manifesting, but some of them are real, they have physicality, and you just substantiated that, Preston.
Yes, I'm just giving you the most recent case that I've had, and I've had numerous of them. She would say, now this is just one woman, and I've only talked with her twice. So she said all of this in just twice. And no one, her husband was there, and another counselor was there. They can never say I put anything into her mind. I just ask her open-ended questions. She described, she says, these hybrids each look a little bit differently. There's different types of them. She said that they would take babies out of her after about 3 months. She said that some of them, she said they would put them in an incubator. Some of them, she said, would be put in the sky in these, she called it crafts, C-R-A-F-T-S. And she said some of them would be put in incubators, and they would take them underground into a special room in the deep underground military base. She also described that she described the time-space continuum. And I mainly just counsel what's called highly complex SREDID now, and all of them talk about space-time, like Albert Einstein talked about, and Christians are really behind time in scientific concept of quantum mechanics, quantum physics. So I had to study quantum physics to keep up with the people that I'm counseling in order to help them. And of course, these people do not have a PhD in physics or nuclear science. They would often talk about a ship that they were taken up into the sky. That's their words. She said they move through time by quantum teleportation. What's interesting is each of these people are chosen for a specific reason, their bloodline. This woman in particular, I would just ask her what was her job, and of course she talked about breeding many creatures. She didn't call them children, but she said they even did experiments on her, and she would describe them in detail. She doesn't really talk about UFOs or anything, because she looked at these as hybrid nephilim creatures. That's the way she looked at them. I didn't mention that to her. In the 10th grade, she scored 100% in chemistry. In physics, she scored 94 on a test that measured that. She would, when I first talked with her, she would talk about specific pain in different part of her body, and especially in her jaw. So then when I counseled with her, there were specific altars who described surgical procedures that these hybrid Nephilim did on her in a deep underground military base laboratory on a surgical scientific table. And she went to the dentist, and they did x-rays of her jaw, and they found the dentist, who didn't know her for the first time, he said, there are strange things that's happened to your jaw, and your teeth are hollow, and she said all of the enamel has been worn off on her teeth, and the dentist couldn't explain it. She went to a doctor, and they did an MRI on her body, and specific altars would tell surgical procedures that they did, but she had specific scars on her body in different locations where her altars said these Nephilim hybrids did surgical procedures on her.
Yeah.
So she has the physical proof to substantiate what she says.
Wow. Well, this is a perfect introduction, Preston. I mean, it's just phenomenal what you're sharing, because I fully concur. I've had the same reports, and like what I mentioned to you, I wonder what it would be like if the two of us were together doing a seminar somewhere. So I'm sorry I can't take you in my spare luggage to South Africa, but if you were going to share any closing words with those people down there that are really looking for help, do you have any closing words or anything that you would like to share with those workers there who will be receiving this particular interview prior to our arriving there?
Yes, let me say that Christian counselors who deal with people with SRA, DID, do not need to know quantum physics. They don't need to know extensive concepts of psychology. They just need a willing heart. They need faith and trust in an omnipotent God who is the wonderful counselor. He knows. And oftentimes, in these people severely traumatized, there's an altar or an entity that God has prepared to help us to counsel them. It is really amazing.
Yes.
And my faith in Christ has increased a multitude by counseling these people. No matter what you hear, you do not need to fear